Hey there, I'm Mr. Terry. I'm a high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video. All right, this video came from the Discord suggestions. And by the way, that's the best place for you to recommend videos to me. Now, this is from a channel I've never heard of called Mitsi Studio. And this video is called World War I. Now, I have no idea what this channel is, what they do, so we'll see. But the video has 850,000 views in 2 months. So I'm excited to see what's up here. Plus it's covering World War I, which is easily one of my favorite topics. All right, the original video will be linked down below. Please make sure to see that. Give it the view, like, subscribe to their channel. Then come on back for some fun. All right, with that, let's get started. All right, we got some... cute looking. Is it like country balls style?
World War I, also known as the First World War or the War to End All Wars.
Oh,
spoiler alert!
This looks cool.
Not. Or named the Great War.
I do that as a joke in my class. I'm like, all right, guys, we're about to learn about the Great War. It was the war to end all wars. We'll never have another war. Hey, this is cool looking. This is neat. It's like cute seeing up one of the most horrifying things that's ever happened in history, which is trench warfare here. I don't know how I should feel about that. Can't make trench warfare look cute.
Which makes absolutely no sense, but fits beautifully between good and
This is cool animation.
The Great War basically started with one dude with a Bosnian Lives Matter flag who fragged a guy in a car.
Bosnian Lives Matter.
The Archduke of Austria.
Okay, so I'm assuming that's where they're going. So Gavrilo Princip was a Bosnian Serb who, a member of a group called the Black Hand, who led an assassination of the Archduke of Austria-Hungary because Bosnians want independence from Austria-Hungary. So I'm assuming that's what the BLM means, not like the Black Lives Matter or definitely not Bureau of Land Management. So Bosnian Lives Matter. And yeah, they blew up. They actually, well, I'll let the video clip play. I'll tell you more about the assassination though.
Well, almost. The Archduke survived the attack.
The first
one. Dumb enough to keep driving around trying to look cool.
No, he left.
Shortly after, he was shot and killed by someone else.
Shoot. I don't want to have to like, I'm not criticizing the video. So there was multiple members of the Black Hand around different routes. They actually published, the Archduke published his route, parade route around the city in the newspapers. So this group, who ends up being an assassination group, you know, had stationed out at different points of it. And this earlier one, they threw a bomb and it didn't really end up in his cart. It went in one either behind him or in front of him. I forget where it was, but it blew up the head of, it was somebody close to him. He's either like a military guy or head of the police. I forget what it was. Now, when that bomb, whatever went off, it didn't kill him, but he didn't just keep going. They went like he left. And the guy, you know, that was in the other car got really hurt, the people in there, and he wanted to go visit them in the hospital. So later in the day, he goes and to visit them, and that's where the assassins end up finding him by chance. They were actually gave up for the day, and Gavrilo and some of his buddies there were at a cafe, and lo and behold, his car drives right past it. Wrong place at the wrong time, because they're like, oh, shoot, I guess we can do this. Pop out, shoots him, shoots his pregnant wife as well, Sophia.
This pissed off Austria-Hungary, who teamed up with Germany, Bulgaria, the Ottoman Empire, and a few more countries that, well, no one really gives a shit about. Serbia basically teamed up with roughly half of Europe and half of, actually, the rest of the world.
What this is so cool. Like, how do they animate this? The lighting is really cool. Like I mean, again, I'm not an animator, but this is really cool looking. Austria immediately blamed the Serbs for this. There was already a lot of tension between Austria and Serbia. Serbia is an independent nation. Bosnia having a lot of Serbs in it also made that problematic. And Bosnia was just recently, a few years before this, annexed by the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So they immediately didn't even want to wait for really like a trial or an investigation about who were these assassins, who supplied them. Austrian government went straight to saying it was Serbia, and it kind of was, kind of wasn't. It was some people that kind of acted rogue outside of the Serbian military and government that had supplied these guys with their weapons. So anyway, but they were just ready for war straight in.
There is your first hint about who's going to win this thing. But Germany had a bold idea called
Serbia has friends.
Oh God, Schlieffen Plan to quickly invade France and win the war. Second spoiler alert, it did not.
We can say what the Schlieffen Plan was?
The First World War is known for its static battle.
Oh, okay. Schlieffen Plan was a way to try to mitigate the problems of a two-front war. So the Schlieffen Plan was this plan under the assumption that you'd be fighting France and Russia at the same time, which had both Germany declared war on both of them. And to try not to have to do a two-front war, the idea was to do an all-out invasion of France before Russia can fully mobilize. The assumption was that although Russia had a huge army, 6 million people, that it would take a long time to mobilize. So attack France as quickly as you can, get them to surrender, and then you can worry about Russia. And the plan to make it more efficient there was go through Belgium. Don't go through the German-French border, go through Belgium. Belgium less defended, easier to navigate. And that's what happens. They go through Belgium and get there. But the French put down a very good resistance in these first few battles at the Marne and stuff. And Russia ended up mobilizing way faster than the Germans thought, and they get a two-front war anyways.
Battles with insane high casualty rates, often without significant gains for either side.
Right. This is cool.
The first military campaign was launched in 1914 by Austria-Hungary against the Kingdom of Serbia.
Yeah.
After fucking up 3 invasion attempts, Serbia was successfully invaded in 1915. Meanwhile,
what did they
3
say?
invasion attempts, Serbia was successfully invaded in 1915.
Serbians put up a pretty nasty fight, though. But again, they're completely overpowered, by Austria and other neighboring groups. Anyway.
Meanwhile, in the West, the Germans initiated their Schlieffen Plan. Basically, the idea was to invade Belgium, where they expected little resistance.
Okay, they did say.
Then use their road and rail network to move all their shit, or Scheiße, straight into France.
So it's weird. By the way, one of the risks about going through Belgium was obviously going to be the PR for this, because Belgium was a neutral nation, not involved in this, in this conflict. And it did make the Germans look really bad. Around the world, they saw that as a very aggressive mood. Even the Americans, who didn't give a crap about this, said that. Also, it's one of the things that was a last straw for Britain. Now, all this stuff happened within a couple days, but Britain is very close with Belgium and declared war with Belgium's invasion.
After which they would stampede hundreds of miles south to the Swiss border and eat, who's writing this rubbish? Cheese fondue. There's a couple of problems regarding the plan that are probably worth mentioning. For starters,
so
the Belgians put up a fierce fight, likely due to their neutrality and Germany shitting all over them, invading, triggering Britain to send their expeditionary army to fuck up their plans.
Oh my God, they do swear.
In addition,
it's like this started out so cutesy, but I'm like, no way is someone gonna want to make a cutesy thing of World War I. And now it's getting all brutal, it's getting all bloody, and they're swearing and stuff. This has turned a very different direction for me.
Belgium road networks suck ass today, let alone even more. In addition, the Belgium road networks sunk ass today, let alone in 1914. So you can imagine the Germans were forced to move their 250,000 troops mostly by rail, and of course, the Belgians continued shitting on German planning by blowing up their own rail infrastructure, which they still haven't fixed today. This video is sponsored by War Thunder.
This is so cool, though. Like, I'm so impressed with the... if you want to check out the War Thunder thing, go to the original video. I want to make sure they get the credit for it, so... But it's so cool, this like animation style. So did they Mitsi Studio, did they focus on World War, or not World War, but like history content in general? Is this something I need to come back to, or is this like just a one-off, them doing something historical here? Because this is cool looking.
Fight the Western powers first and deal with Russia just
okay, so they're explaining the other part of the
Xbox and PlayStation. Before even entering France, Germany was under the presumption that it was going to fight the Western powers first and deal with Russia just
Russia would take a long time.
They reckoned 6 weeks for Russia to mobilize their troops, which took the Russians 15 days. Just a little bit off by about 1 month. The result was 4 years of trench warfare in the West, with massive battles to break the stalemate. In the East, most battles were fought with more ability to maneuver. Even armored trains were used for offensive operations.
A big reason for that is the battlefield was very large, and Russia had a lot harder time defending itself. France has got Britain to be able to help them. Russia's basically on their own. The Central Powers have cut off access to Russia from the West. The Germans have it locked down in the up kind of by Denmark. They've kind of locked down the water through there. And then the Ottoman Empire, big important strategic thing for the Central Powers, was they could lock up entrance to the Black Sea. So Russia was kind of on their own, and as you know, struggled.
Some of the largest battles taking place in the West was the Battle of Verdun, the Battle of the Somme,
longest battle,
the Third Ypres campaign. Yes, there were 2 more, and yes, lots of people died. The German 1918 Spring Offensive, and eventually the Battle of Amiens,
jumping ahead,
the end of the war.
stalemate between 1914 and 1918 in the West. Basically 4 years of millions dying and very little movement. That's why World War I was so awful.
During those times, both sides developed new weapons, with poisonous gas being arguably the most controversial.
The most what?
Developed new weapons, with poisonous gas being arguably the most controversial.
What version? Popular?
Sides developed new weapons, with poisonous gas being arguably the most controversial.
Controversial. Yeah, I mean, what's the famous line? It's never a war crime the first time you do it. So, yeah. The Germans introduced gas in 1915, right? Pretty close. 1915, I believe. Or was it 1916? I want to say 15. And I think by the end of the year, the British started using it too. So it was an answer to trench warfare. The thing was, you couldn't get your enemy out of their trench. Remember, this is a time where air flight is so new that like the idea of bombing as we know it today was not really a thing. You couldn't just bomb, enemy trenches. So everything was done basically at ground level. You couldn't get your enemy out of your trench. And that's what gas was for, trying to launch canisters towards the enemy's trenches where they'd either die or have to leave their trench, thus making them exposed. So, yeah.
The Battle of Verdun is the longest battle in military history,
you guys like that?
beginning on February the 21st until December the 18th, 1916. The initial German advance brought some successes. One of them was the capture of the French Douaumont fortress without firing a single shot. Perhaps the French soldiers were too busy eating their baguettes and drinking Le Cognac.
No. What are they going to do? Dude, that beats fire. That's what they're thinking right there. That beats fire. No, that beat not fire.
Initially, the Germans planned to hold the high grounds west of Verdun, while the Allies kept sending reinforcements. This was done via a supply road that was bombarded intensively throughout the battle. The losses mounted on both sides, and after 5 months, the Germans had to divert troops to the Battle of the Somme. Moving over to the seas, most battles were fought between German U-boats and the Allied navies. At the Battle of Jutland, the surface fleets of both sides met and exchanged fire. Germany sunk more ships, but still shat their lederhoses because of Britain and because of, well, too many ships. They withdrew their fleet and kept it in the port for the rest of the war. Back on land, the Battle of the Somme was becoming even deadlier than Verdun. The first day, the British alone suffered more than 57,000 casualties.
Isn't that the biggest? I think it's the biggest of single days. Single day, they're 57,000. It's like, and they did that with like very little movement forward, just getting slaughtered, mowed down by machine guns. It's crazy. One of the creepiest quotes I've read coming out of eyewitnesses of World War I was a German. I don't know if it was Battle at the Somme. It might have been, where he said in his, I don't know, I forget where he writes it, but he was like, he simply just said, I didn't even have to aim. That's how relentlessly the British were pushing and how easy it was to kill people. It's like, I didn't even have to aim. You just kept feeding in the rounds and just holding the trigger down. That's why how you get those kind of casualties. I like to say the deadliness of World War I is a combination of two things, right? New weapons, but old tactics.
The Allied planners were too optimistic about breaking through German defences, a costly lesson by anybody's standard. By now, the British started to deploy different types of tanks, a male-classed variant with 6-pounder guns and a female version armed with machine guns rolled over the battlefield. A non-binary tank with no guns was also in development because... okay, no, I can't do it. Of course it wasn't. The whole world was killing each other, but they weren't crazy. A year later, the French army...
So tanks, at first, tanks were crappy in World War I. I don't care what people say. They sucked, especially when you compare to what happened in World War II. And the early tanks of World War I, simply they had one purpose, and it wasn't for military... or I shouldn't say, like, offensive engagements. It was simply to get out of no man's land. You couldn't get out of no man's land. You had machine gun fire and you had nothing to protect you. So you used a tank there, get it, it's very armored, and just plow through and try to get through, barbed wire. You can like hide troops behind it, but it was also very difficult because no man's land was muddy. They would get stuck all the time. Also, these things would break down. Remember, like automobile type technology was still very new, and these things would break down. So, yeah, World War I tanks sucked.
Introduced the Renault 17 tank with a full rotating turret. The first tank could do a 360 no-scope. The Germans suffered less casualties than the Allies because they were mostly on the defensive after their initial invasion. That's why they pimped up their trenches a bit more to include massage salons and jacuzzis. Well, maybe not those last two, but still, they did look better. In 1917, Germans were wearing their happy socks because the Russian Revolution ended the war in the east, and Germany could now transfer many divisions to the west to support their upcoming spring offensive.
Sign the treaty. Brest-Litovsk or whatever it's called, the name with it. And man, Russia had to give so much for that war. I remember two stages in 1917. You had the first revolution, the February-March one that took out the monarchy, and then the one in October where the communists take over, right? And Lenin wants to pull out the war, pull the Russians out of the war, which was very popular and a major part of their platform. But they gave up all the Baltic states, Poland, all that stuff. And yeah, they gave a lot, had to give a lot up. But yeah, this was good news for the Germans. But same year, America.
In the same year, the US joined the war. So the German offensive was an all-in situation for Germany to save themselves from US intervention. In the skies above, more and more planes emerged. At the start of the war, most planes flew scout missions.
Take
as
pictures.
The war progressed, these planes were getting involved in combat missions. At first, pilots drew pistols to shoot at each other, and bombs were carried on a pilot's lap before being thrown out.
Because it couldn't do big ones.
These Wild West pistol shootouts were transformed to dogfights between fighter planes and bombers to go for the role for strategic bombing. Far down below, the Third Battle of Ypres, or Battle of Passchendaele, unfolded.
So planes were mostly used for reconnaissance. You got that. So one of the things you could do for trenches is map them out. So they would install cameras on the bottom.
Another great battle with great losses around another tiny village. Except this time, all the fighting took place in 3 feet of mud. Not pleasant at all. Meanwhile, outside of Europe, battles were fought between Allied colonial-controlled countries in Africa and German-occupied territories. However, most European countries did not give a fuck about Africa, and even argued to collaborate to keep repressing the indigenous population.
Yeah, if they'd cared, there wouldn't have been the whole scramble for Africa in the decades leading up to this. A lot of people forget about those skirmishes. Now, in World War I, a common thing was to recruit from your allies, or sorry, your colonies. So like the British used a ton of Indians, for example, to fight in theirs, as well as Australians and New Zealanders. Saw that in like Gallipoli. So yeah, and doing that, plus wanting to take over each other's colonies. That's why Japan declares war or gets involved in the war, joins the Allies. They want German possessions in the Pacific. British wanted German stuff in Africa too, like today's Tanzania. They were hoping to get that because actually, if you look at the map of what British colonies were, they could have had a direct line from north to south of the whole continent, from Egypt all the way to South Africa, if they could get that Tanzania colony. And there was actually plans by the British to make an transnational or transcontinental railroad in Africa from Egypt all the way to South Africa. So they fought down there.
Does that sound a bit like racism to you?
For sure.
Speaking of racism, did you hear about the Ottomans and the Armenians in World War I?
Armenian genocide.
Just a question. No controversial references intended, of course. Now, on to a more serious note. The Ottomans also threatened...
So the Armenians, large Christian population, and also Orthodoxy, were, by the Ottomans, rumored to be basically working with the Russians, that they were traitors and were like aiding the Russians and stuff like that. So they suppressed, probably killed a couple million people in Armenia. A genocide that's largely been kind of ignored.
The British Army by trying to butt plug the Suez Canal. In the north, they advanced through the Caucasus to fight the Russian Empire.
They're long enemies.
In East Asia and the Pacific, the Germans were also bullied by the Japanese, who occupied vast territories from them.
These really look like
yes, Germany and Japan were not best buddies yet, because this is the First World War and not the Second. Minor detail.
Very
Back in the West, the German army made initial gains with their spring offensive and even came within 100 kilometers of Paris.
Yeah.
They brought in some giant railroad guns and fired off a few shots at the city center to piss off the city folks. By now, the German operation faced logistical challenges. Fortunately, they had experience with their Schlieffen plan. So
that was the goal, to take Paris. If you take Paris, France is done. We saw that in World War II. And just imagine being so close. Like people in Paris, if you were from Paris, which a lot of the soldiers are going to be, fighting from something you can almost see with your eyes. Like that is how close it is. It's how close your home is.
They did not do anything.
Wait, what's this one?
folks. By now, the German operation faced logistical challenges. Fortunately, they had experience with their Schlieffen plan.
What do they mean?
So they did not do anything, did not fix anything, and the entire plan went into the shitter once again. To make matters worse, the Allies transformed the front line into a clustering web fight of trenches. What followed was the Battle of Amiens, being part of the 100-day offensive that eventually moved the Allied troops beyond the heavily defended Hindenburg line. By now, only Germany was left fighting the Allies, and the morale in the German army at this point was, shall we say, pretty bad. With their previous failed spring offensive and mounting losses now exceeding those of the Allies, timing was everything for Germany to end the war as soon as possible.
Because remember, the Germans are fighting not in Germany, and now they've been pushed back in the West. They've been pushed back in the West all the way now to their borders. So the big question is, with this losing, are the Germans willing to keep fighting, right? And will they be willing to fight in their own territory where civilians are going to be more exposed and that kind of stuff? So,
in a dense forest on the outskirts of Compiègne, the German delegation met with a few important-looking Allied folks to sign the armistice. The signing eventually led to the treaty.
By the way, interesting note. You see that train car right there? That's where they signed the armistice. This thing went on display. Is it at Versailles? They actually brought it to Versailles because, you know, Versailles is where they're going to sign the treaty, and they put this train car there where the armistice was going to be. So the French held it. When in World War II, when the Nazis take over Paris, Hitler takes us over. He forces France to sign basically their surrender in the same cart. Hitler got that thing out and made the French sign it in World War II in that same cart.
Folks to sign the armistice. The signing eventually led to the Treaty of Versailles, a piece of paper basically stating Germany was going to pay big time for 4 years of shit,
and take the blame,
give up a big chunk of German territory to pissed off neighbors, and finally pinky promise to never start another world war.
By the way, no Central Powers invited to that meeting at all.
Especially one that is promoted by a screaming Austrian guy with a square moustache. The armistice was signed on the 11th of November 1918 at 5:45 a.m. and came into effect at 11 o'clock the same day.
I like to tell my students that, even though I don't quiz them exactly on the specific dates and stuff, but like the 11-11-11 thing you can remember, okay? The treaty was signed in the 11th month, okay? On the 11th day of that month, and the armistice went in effect at 11 a.m. 11-11-11. If it was only ended in 1911, that would have been great, but 1918.
Which is a bit of a shame for particularly one soldier who died 1 minute before 11. Again, timing is everything.
All quiet on the Western Front.
Play War Thunder now for free.
Okay, I got some final thoughts for you. Don't go anywhere. All right, this was super cool. That animation was so cool to look at there. And the way they depicted everything was fantastic. Visually, it was great. I didn't expect the cynical and like darker like tone and like profanity to do it. Because again, the first scene looked like this thing was going to be all cutesy. And then no, it actually was like super dark. So obviously a very, very quick synopsis in 10 minutes for the war there. Hopefully I was able to add a few things, some interesting points that give you bigger context with that. But again, this was fantastic. I'd like to know from you guys if they have done other history related stuff or if they don't usually do that. If there are, and there's some good ones you guys like to see me cover, yeah, let me know. Best way to do that, like I said, I got this suggestion from the video suggestions channel on my Discord server. That's the best place to be able to share videos with me because I can see them a lot easier. And that'd be great. There's a link to the Discord server down below. All right, with that, y'all, we'll see you next time. Bye.